Thanks for joining us for another session in our special week of centered programming, talking about the connection between the mind, body, and spirit. Tonight, our session is titled Promoting Resilience in Yourself and Your Children, and we're honored to have Simone Hidary is going to be leading this discussion. Simone is the middle school psychologist at Barkai Yeshiva. She maintains a private practice, working with individual clients and running parenting workshops focused on enhancing the parent-child relationship. And she will be interviewed tonight by Regine Galanti. And Regine is a licensed clinical psychologist and the founder of Long Island Behavioral Psychology and the author of Anxiety Relief for Teens. She specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy and focuses on the treatment of children and teens with anxiety. And she's my daughter, and I'm very proud of her. So, Regine, do you want to get started?
Sure, yes. So I think I speak for both of us when I say we're really excited to be here, especially for the Center promoting mental health awareness, because it's such an important topic. And one thing psychologists have been saying recently is, you know, the coronavirus is one thing, but the mental health kind of wave and impact is probably coming, and we're only at the beginning of this. So I love that you're putting on programming to help with that, and it's probably more of an ongoing discussion. And I'm really also happy to be here with Simone, because we've been working on cases together for years. So even though we're obviously not in the same place, it's fun to do something together. And we're going to leave time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat and leaving time at the end. And feel free to message us privately if you prefer. So let's get started. So what do you think people should know right now, kind of sitting in this strange position in our lives?
Thanks, Regine. Yeah, so just to echo, it's wonderful to be here with you, and wonderful that the center is making this programming. I think in terms of what people should know during this time, I don't think that you and I tonight are going to say anything that's so earth-shattering or so new for people to hear. I think we're going to relay a lot of concepts that people have heard before throughout their lives. I think now sometimes it's harder to remember some of these strategies or techniques or concepts because, you know, we're in a situation that none of us expected to be in, right? None of us thought we would be a parent or a grandparent or a child, in that case, in a pandemic, in social distancing for weeks at a time. And there's a lot of uncertainty that's happening now. And sometimes in times of uncertainty, one, we're feeling a bit, you know, not at ease, stressed, overwhelmed. It's helpful to just review some of the basics and go back to you know, go back to the simple things.
Yeah, I love that you said that also, because one thing I find in my clinical practice is people will often be like surprised almost that psychologists are not the most well-adapted people in the whole world, but it's very different to know what to do and to act on it. So that idea of like needing to practice what we preach and go back to the basics is really important, because there's a reason why we can say the right thing and still not do it. So I like that point.
I share, like, we're in, I think it's week 10 now of this social distancing. And, you know, through my work with students at middle school and a lot of the parents I work with, I'm hearing the word burnt out a lot. I'm wondering if you're hearing that in your practice as well, where when this first started, everyone's Instagram was flooded with these gorgeous schedules and different things that they were seeing, and very enthusiastic and gung-ho. And, you know, after a while, we kind of lose steam and we lose energy. And that's why I feel like it's so great to be having this talk at this point in time, when I think people, you know, the hard feelings are really starting to hit.
Yeah, I think fatigue is a huge one. It's like everybody's just like, I want to get back to normal. Even if I'm not sure what normal is, it's just, I'm done with this, whatever this is. I just feel done. So strategies. So how can we help people push through?
You know, we're here tonight to talk about a concept of resilience, and I'm sure you have a lot to say about this concept as well, so please chime in. I think when we think of resilience, we think of kind of bouncing back from something, right? Like our capacity to bounce back from a difficult or stressful situation. And what I hope everyone tonight gets out of our conversation is that resilience is not only about bouncing back, but it's about getting through hard and stressful times and coming out changed, maybe even for the better, having some type of personal growth. We don't want to get back to the point that we were at. Right? We don't want to be, and I think it's going to be impossible for us to be the same people, the same parents, the same mothers, grandmothers that we once were. Our hope is that we can somehow muster our internal resources, continue through this difficult time, and come out in having grown in some way.
Yeah. So I think also resilience is so important, and the research in psychology just shows more and more that it's a key skill in helping people manage difficult situations, that people that are more resilient do better, but that also building resilience is like building a muscle. Like your brain is a muscle. So we think about that with exercise all the time, right? You do, you know, if you're working your arms, it's not enough to do one rep, and it's not enough to do that one time. It's about repeated, it's increased reps in a row, and then also the kind of day to day, working out only today and then next month is not going to make any change. So resilience kind of works the same way. And any really psychology skill is more about the practice and the repeated practice. It's not about the one-time thing.
For sure. I feel like some people feel like there are some people that are just born with this capacity to be resilient, right? So I like how you're really describing it as a muscle. I think for sure there are some people that are born with certain traits that help them be resilient. If you're optimistic, if you're born with a good capacity for emotion regulation. But I think what's so unique is that we can all develop it and cultivate it within ourselves and within our children, as long as you do practice and you do go through the motions and you do work hard at it. So I really love that emotional muscle metaphor. I think that's a great way to think about it.
But what, I guess, let's start with what resilience isn't. So I think it's a hard concept to wrap your brain around. We throw it around, and I think we're going to go through really what it is. But first, what isn't it?
So it's not something that you have to be born with, right? It's something, as Regine shared, that you can cultivate within yourself, that you can grow. I think a lot of times when, you know, in popular culture, and I think in our own minds, when we think about resilience and resilient people, we picture people that are like always happy, kind of always chipper, down for anything, can weather the storm, always seem calm, cool, and collected. And I think that's a pretty harmful misconception for us to think that way, because in reality, the only way to build resilience is to experience the stress, right? Is to go through those hard moments, is to have difficult and challenging feelings and make it through to the other side. And once you make it through to the other side, you become stronger and you're better able to tolerate those situations or crises in the future. So when we think in our heads, somebody that just always seems calm, they're probably the most resilient person. I don't really think that's the case. It's more of people who are able to get in touch with their feelings, recognize that they're going through a hard time or that they're experiencing a hard emotion, and being able to tolerate that and continue to move on.
So I love that point, and I also think that I don't think of my practice as a resilience-based practice, but the way you're describing it is really what I call emotion regulation, which I know is a key factor in resilience, which is how do I manage when I'm up to kind of come down, and recognize that those I hate the word bad feelings actually, but negative feelings that I experience are normal and part of life. That everybody feels anxious. That's kind of my session one when I see anyone, is to talk about how anxiety is a normal emotion that everybody has, and it's the reason why you don't go running into streets when there's a car coming. It saves us, and that's good. You want to be able to experience that negative emotion in select circumstances, but we don't like it. It's uncomfortable because it's supposed to be, because it's supposed to protect us. So, it's the idea of if you're hiding from anxiety, then you're never going to be able to figure out how to handle it. And you need to figure out how to handle it because it's part of life. So we can either hide from it, or we can say, okay, I'm going to go through a situation that's tough or that's going to make me anxious. And And I can't avoid it, because if I avoid everything that makes me scared or nervous or sad, then my life is going to be way less rich. So, you know, I like that you're highlighting that kind of point.
We'll go into this a bit later, but I think we have a lot of parents in the crowd. I can't scroll through all the names right now while I'm talking. But for parents, I think it's important for us to know, in terms of cultivating resilience in our children, and we're going to talk about this, it's not about paving an extremely smooth road for our kids so that they don't need to experience any distress or anxiety. And I think you were saying that when we have those bad or negative feelings, it's uncomfortable. The worst thing for a parent is to see their child distressed, overwhelmed, upset, anxious, being stuck home for 10 weeks. It's almost inevitable that our children are going to feel that way. And again, we're going to talk about this in a bit, but we don't need to try and erase those feelings from our children. The way we're going to help them build that emotional muscle is to teach them how to tolerate it and to recognize it and accept it.
And it's funny that you said that, because going back to the fatigue, I actually think this is one area where fatigue helps you. Because all these parents who were like, I'm going to schedule every single minute of my kid's day, and from 10 to 10:05, we're going to do art, and then 10:05 to 10:07 is going to be a breathing break. Like, everybody's done with that, and that's actually good from here, because it's helping us as a parent kind of take a step back and letting your kids be a little bored, and that's not a bad thing. So,
yeah, I don't see those posts at all anymore, so I agree.
What?
I think another thing that resilience is not, it's not extraordinary, right? It's not unique. It's not so difficult to achieve. I think what's so interesting and amazing about psychology and humankind is that we're all born with this innate capacity for resilience. Right? And if you look at research about people who have been through extremely stressful situations, crisis situations, different types of trauma, yes, there are people that leave those situations with, with a lot of psychological distress, but the majority of people who go through very stressful situations or periods of crisis end up experiencing some type of growth or some type of development as a result. So it's not something that's so difficult to attain or so extraordinary. I think we all can, if we work at it, develop this within ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that we can build it. So where do we start? How do we get resilience? How do we become more resilient?
So I think it's wonderful that the center is doing this programming this week in terms of wellness and taking care of ourselves. I think one way to start building resilience is to kind of make sure that we're regulating the amount of stress in our lives, right? And obviously there are some things that are in our control and not in our control, but there are certain things, they call it mental health hygiene, that we could be doing on a regular basis in order to kind of reduce the stress that we're experiencing in our lives. And to go along with your emotional muscle example, the same way that a lot of us have made a priority to work out every day or every other day during this quarantine, like, are we taking that same time out to reflect upon our own emotional capacities and how we're doing there and reducing stress? And it's really important to kind of think about that and think about what's going on in my day on a regular basis, and what am I doing not only to help my physical self, but to help my emotional self.
Yeah, I love that idea, like figuring out even what you need as a person to help yourself, what time, what space. And a lot of times that is a physical thing, right? Like, we know that one of my first kind of homeworks in therapy for almost anyone is, okay, how often are you exercising? And it's not because all of a sudden I'm a trainer on the side and I want their, extra business. It's because we know that when people exercise, it gives them more kind of tolerance for emotional things. So it's not always the same exercises. It's, you don't always have to. The truth is, for depression, we know that the more intensely you exercise, the better you feel emotionally afterwards, because it releases endorphins and it gets you moving in a way that you normally wouldn't. So sometimes even that, but we have this baseline level of stress, and reducing that is always going to be helpful, whether you're, anxious, depressed, or just in a very stressful situation like we are now.
Yeah. So exercise for sure is one of them, right? Like, it actually physically changes the chemistry of our body, and it works in a lot of the ways that the antidepressant medications work in terms of rebalancing your hormones. So it's pretty fascinating the way we have these internal mechanisms to help us regulate our moods. I think another big thing when we're thinking about reducing stress is our social connections, which as a community, we do a beautiful job in regular times, and I even think in these very irregular times of staying connected. But it's easy for us to kind of get lost in the day-to-day, busyness of our own homes and our own families, that sometimes we forget to take the time out to really enjoy other people and the connections that we have with other people. And that's we are social beings, right? That's kind of what makes us human, and we enjoy the company of others, and it really does help reduce stress. So figuring out whether it's a friend Zoom or some type of family Kahoot or whatever it is that's going to maintain your connectivity with others, that can also help bring the stress down.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's funny that you mentioned, I know the community does do this well. And a point to that is I live in Long Island. I'm not, in Brooklyn or Deal these days. And so many times in my kind of school groups and WhatsApp groups, someone will send out a meme of or not a meme, a short clip of a wedding or a bar mitzvah or something. And I'm looking at the video, I'm like, yep, this one's from the community, this one's from the community, this one, we're the kind of, the clips that are going around that are showing how we can do social connectivity in a social distancing way are often from the community. So I can speak from an outsider's perspective on that.
And thinking about our children and that social connectivity, I think especially for our teenagers, like our middle schoolers who I work with and our high schoolers, they're really missing out on physically being with their friends and seeing their friends. And I think understanding that as a parent, that being a real struggle is really important.
Yeah. So how else can we increase our capacity to cope during this crisis? What else can we do?
So, I think, and I know that you gave a talk last week and we spoke a lot about this, I think self-compassion is a very important thing for us to be thinking about and practicing right now, in terms of recognizing that we are wearing many different hats right now, right? And again, we didn't sign up for this. This is not something that we expected. This is not something that we want. It's kind of a situation that we're stuck in. Many of us are being parents to multiple children, working from home at the same time, cooking, cleaning, right? Taking care of so many things. And it's not easy. And I think we tend to set very high standards for ourselves, which is amazing and pushes us to move forward and do our best. I think now is the time for us to take a little bit of a step back and say, you know what? It's okay if I don't do everything perfectly, right? Or it's okay if I'm having a hard time. It's okay if I'm feeling overwhelmed. This is normal. It's normal to be struggling right
now. Yeah. I heard someone else say this week that we were never meant to parent alone. So that's a specific parenting point, but we weren't built for this. We weren't built for this. So we're going to have to find different ways to manage this that we normally wouldn't. And one idea that I keep coming back to that is part of the kind of type of psychology I practice is this idea of acceptance. So acceptance doesn't mean, oh, everything sucks and I should just accept that everything sucks. That's not acceptance. Acceptance means saying, okay, how do I say that this is where I am for now and stop trying to change it and live it to the best of my abilities. So almost like, how do I live my day to day in a way that's helpful to me instead of hurtful to me? The best example I can give for this skill, which is a little kind of morbid, but stick with me, is if I came over and I cut off your finger and, they couldn't reattach it, you could be mad at me for the rest of your life and no one would fault you because you'd have 9 fingers because of me. But that probably wouldn't be very good for you. You'd probably be miserable and angry. Or you can find a way to live the best 9-fingered life that you can. And you should definitely fire me as your therapist and kind of sue me or do all those things. But short of that, you got to find a way to move on. And I think acceptance goes really well with self-compassion here in terms of right now we're living in this infinite present where everything is just, you can't think about the future because it just makes you more anxious and more uncomfortable. So saying, okay, this is where I am now. How am I going to make the most of it right now, instead of dwelling on all the things I can't have and all the things I was planning and I'm not going to get.
And I think oftentimes we experience sadness, stress, anxiety, we feel overwhelmed, and that lasts for some time. But then we end up beating ourselves up for feeling that way. Like, I shouldn't be feeling stressed, or I should be managing better. And that's what really perpetuates the longer lasting feeling of anxiety or depression in the long run, right? It's those negative judgments that we're making about ourselves, that we shouldn't be feeling this way, or we could be doing a better job, or we should be doing something differently. And I know in your clinical work, you work with people a lot in terms of managing those should statements and kind of working on that. But I think for all of us to kind of take a step back and say, like, this is hard and that's okay, and accepting the situation is really important.
Yeah, and I love how what you're saying is staying in the moment also, because the truth is those judgments that you just talked about, like, I should be managing this better, is all about like your expectations of yourself in the future or the past. It's not living in the moment. If you're in the moment with whatever stress you're experiencing and you can stay there, then chances are you're going to be doing fine. That even if you're in pain, or even if you're feeling anxious or stressed out, you can manage it.
And that leads beautifully to what I was going to talk about next, which is we all need to work on managing our expectations, right? We're stuck home with 5, 6, 7, 8 family members possibly at a time. Yes, we all have these beautiful expectations of what our home should look like, how our family should interact, how our daily schedule should go. You know, kind of lower those a little bit, right? Conflict, stress, all that is normal when you're in close quarters with the same people for a really long amount of time. I think one of the hardest things about this social distancing is when we are all stuck together, it becomes like this pressure cooker situation where our own faults and vulnerabilities become very apparent to ourselves and everyone around us, and everybody else's faults and vulnerabilities become magnified. So those small things that our kids used to do that irritated us, but we could handle because they were in school for 8 hours a day, we're now with them all the time, and it's happening all the time. And I think that it's just really important for us to remember that again, all of this is normal, and to manage the way that we expect and go into certain situations, and that's going to help us stay calm and be able to manage our emotions when we're in the thick of it.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you can think of that would help people increase their capacity to cope right now?
So I think I just have a personal example. I had to go to an appointment that was pretty far away. It was an hour car ride, and I was so excited to have like the hour of silence, and like no music, nothing. It was just going to be me, which happened a while. And I started to think about September, and if school's going to start in September, and then what's going to happen if school's only on a half-a-day schedule, and then I have to work, and then who's going to watch my kids, and how am I going to manage all of that? And I noticed that my heart started pounding, and I was sweating, and I was getting really anxious and nervous. And in that moment, I was able to say, okay, Simone, hold on, stop, right? This thinking is not helping you right now. And I think something that can really help us cope during this time is to pay attention to our thoughts and how our thoughts are influencing the way that we're feeling. And we know in psychology, right, there's a whole therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, that's based upon this interaction between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. And if we're able to notice when we start heading down that downward spiral with our thoughts, and we start predicting doom and gloom, and start thinking that everything negative is going to happen, if we're able to recognize that and notice that, and somehow kind of either just say, okay, I'm going down that downward spiral right now, like this is what's happening, or even maybe pause those thoughts for just a moment, it can really increase our capacity to better manage our emotions in that moment.
Yeah, because thoughts are not facts. People think, okay, I think something, therefore it's true. And that's not actually true. Thoughts are more like sunglasses. You know, you take one pair off and you put on like one with a different color tint, the world looks different. So you can change your thoughts. You don't have to buy into them just because you have them and just because they're scary. But the problem with our brain is our brain likes emotional thoughts, and those are the ones that stick. So if I think, this is my phone, okay, big deal. But if I think my phone's out to get me, now all of a sudden I'm panicked about my phone kind of, I don't know, being poisoned or something. Those are the sticky ones. So when you're worrying about the future, those are thoughts that are going to be harder to fight, but you can fight them.
We have that control. We have that control to change it. And something I like to tell my middle school students, and something that I use myself and a lot of my clients, is, are these thoughts right now, are they helping me, or are they hurting me? Because if they're not helping me, let me try to change them. Right? We have enough that we need to deal with right now. We don't really need to add on the additional burden of having these negative and unhelpful thoughts going off in our head.
Yeah, I agree. So
one last thing to help us promote resilience, and then I do want to get to the child part, is I think focusing on our achievements so far and what we've done so far is really helpful, right? Like, I think if I would have asked myself 3 months ago, how would you manage the situation of being home, working from home, cleaning, doing laundry, and taking care of your kids, I would have been like, no way, I would have fallen apart a long time ago, right? And yes, there have been moments when I've fallen apart, and it's not always pretty, but overall, like, each of us, we're getting through it, right? We're figuring out a way to get through the day. And I think reminding ourselves, like, I can handle it. I've been handling it, and I can continue to handle it. It's something that's an expectation, or that's a thought that's going to be helpful to us in terms of moving forward. If anybody reads the New York Times parenting blog, they have this little section called Tiny Victories that I love, where like parents submit these like small teeny things that went well in their parenting day that then like made them feel really good about themselves. And there's a few different bloggers that talk about just at the end of the day, thinking back about 2 or 3 moments in your day where you handled something challenging, right? And reminding ourselves of what we're capable of, and what we've been handling so far is going to give us that energy to keep moving forward.
I love that. And I would also suggest, I know this skill kind of is a little bit eye-rolly. I'm not necessarily the touchy-feely type, but I've been recommending it to a lot of people these days. Keep a gratitude journal. What that means is write down 2 or 3 things every day that you're grateful for. And they can be tiny things like, like my kids left me alone for 5 minutes, or bigger things. But when you write it down, it kind of forces you to engage with it in a different way. And then at the end of the week, you can kind of look back and say, oh, look at all the things that went well, not only the things that didn't. So I like it. I think it fits with the tiny victories piece.
Yeah. I'm also not such I agree with you that this might be difficult at first, but really works, is thinking about how you can do this on a family-wide level, right? Like, how can you encourage family members to think about things that they're grateful for and that they appreciate? I used to do something wonderful in my family where I would ask everyone in the family the favorite part of their day before they went to sleep, right? And this way they can reflect on something that was positive for them. My kids quickly learned how to use that to extend bedtime for like ever, especially when we were living in Deal with 10 people. But I think asking, trying to figure out a way that we can engage our family members to think back about positive moments or things that they're grateful for. The research is all there that that's such a powerful contributor to overall, mental health and well-being.
Yeah. So let's talk about kids. How do you get kids to be resilient?
So, it's really fascinating to me how strong the research is in this area. And what we know in this area is that the single best predictor of resilience in childhood lies in the presence of a loving caregiver, right? So if a child has a consistent, a stable, and a safe relationship in their life, that is the strongest predictor of resilience later on. And there's so many studies out there about kids who have gone through different types of stressful situations and crises, and it really is shown that if they felt that they had a caregiver that they can rely on, that understood them, that helped them through it, that they walked out of that situation in a much better place than those who did not. And I think that sends a very clear and strong message for us parents as to like what our mission should be while we're going through this, and what we should be trying to do for our children. I know there's a lot of pressures in terms of Zoom school and doing work and trying to help them master different kinds of academic skills. We really need to be focusing on the emotional part of our relationship and our attachment, because if that's not there, or if that's not working well, everything else really is not going to fall into place in the same way.
Yeah. So what advice do you have for parents when they're like, no, but I'm telling them it's okay to feel whatever they feel and I'm trying, but I'm just like, everything's so crazy.
Parenting basics that I think, especially now, week 10 or whatever it is, we need to keep reminding ourselves. I think we're talking about self-compassion and feeling compassion for ourselves. It's so important for us to feel compassion for our children as well, right? Our children, most of them are very young. They don't have very well-developed language skills. It's hard for them to communicate what's going on in their life. I mean, there are moments where it's hard for me to communicate what's going on in my life as a trained psychologist and adult in the world. So we need to look at their behavior as communication, right? If they are acting up, being moody, being irritable, having frequent meltdowns, yes, our go-to reaction is to be impatient, frustrated, stressed, this again. And I think sometimes taking a minute to stop and say, okay, what is my child trying to communicate to me right now, right? Like, what's really going on here? Because most of the time there is more that's going on there. And if we're able to kind of take their point of view, that automatically helps us in the situation keep our cool and address the real core of the issue.
Yeah. And one thing I've been telling parents over and over and over and over is don't assume that your kids are unaffected by this just because they're not talking about it in every situation like adults are. It's affecting them just as much as it's affecting you. So anything you feel, kind of just, I don't know, think about it from a 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old's perspective, and they're feeling the same thing. They just have fewer tools. Which is hard.
I've had parents call me over the past few weeks. One mom called me. She has a 4-year-old son that was completely well-adjusted and is constantly melting down and having these tantrums, right? And we thought together, like, what is her son really thinking? And we came up with a little bit of a narrative, right? Like, there's a lot of things that are different in my life right now, right? I don't know what's going on, but the overall feeling in my house is not good. I don't like changes. My parents are yelling at me more. Like, are my mom and dad are going to be okay? What's going to happen if they leave me? What's going to happen if they get sick, right? So this is what they're processing in their head, and they don't really have the words to communicate that. So instead, he's really melting down. And that applies to our older children as well. And I think their thoughts and their fears become more complex as they get older. Am I safe? Are my family members going to be safe? If my dad goes to the supermarket, what's going to happen when he comes home? Right? These are all thoughts that are likely going through your children's mind because things trickle in from the outside world and they don't always have the best ways to express it. And it comes out in their behavior. So if we look at their behavior as, what is my child really trying to tell me, as opposed to, oh my gosh, my child's driving me nuts right now, it's much easier for us to be compassionate in that moment.
Yeah. And we also have that word for, we talk about kids as egocentric or teenagers as egocentric. They're all about themselves, which is normal developmentally. So like if you have, a teenager that's complaining that like graduation's canceled when somebody they know is in the hospital and sick, and you're thinking, hey, where are your priorities, kids? As much as it would be inappropriate for you as an adult to have those priorities, that is normal for them. Like, that's okay. That's what we expect from a normal developing kid. To worry that their birthday party is canceled, much more than they're worried about these big ideas of like death and illness, because that, like, kids, at least teenagers especially, feel like they're invincible. So it's normal for them not to worry about that.
Yeah, I'm working in middle school. I've had so many parents call me and say, like, there's something wrong with my child. They don't care about all the people that are sick and dying in the world, right? Like, all they care about is Fortnite and their friends and what's going on. And just like you said, right, that they are egocentric, they are focusing on themselves. And developmentally, that social part of their lives is what's so important for them right now. And they're really missing out on that. So also trying to understand that and think about ways that you can help them, even in small ways, have those interactions or some semblance of what's considered normal can be very helpful.
Yeah. And then being aware of your emotional reaction, that like sometimes we don't like to think about that because it's kind of crushing to think this is my kid's kind of main job as a kid is to be social, and they have none of that. So sometimes if you go there, it's almost like very painful, and that's hard. So that gets into all those skills we were talking about in terms of resilience at the beginning, that it is important to kind of take your kids' perspective, but not to drown in it. Because they're not drowning. Kids are resilient. They do well. They bounce back. So they're going to be fine. Like, you know, they are going to adjust, but you have to give them the room also.
And I think, you know, I like what you said about not drowning in our children's emotions, but making space for it, right? I think a lot of very well-intentioned and very well-meaning parents see that their children are struggling or see changes in behavior and are just trying to make things better right now because they feel so bad for them that they're missing graduation, or that they can't see their friends, or that they're not having a normal school year. But just like we need that space to kind of accept our feelings, our children need that space, and they might need help from you to label what they're going through and accept that too. That it's normal to be disappointed, it's normal to be frustrated, it's normal to be stressed out when they can't get organized for Zoom school, right? And we don't need to make everything better for them right now. In fact, if we help them recognize that this is hard and that they're experiencing hard feelings, that's what's going to help them get through it and be stronger as a result.
So how do you help parents? What advice would you have for parents about helping their kids through their own emotions? Like, what does that look like?
So first, I think it's trying to manage our own emotions when our kids have emotions, right? Because, you know, our brains are wired in a way where we experience the same emotion as the people that we're in front of. So when our kids are having these big meltdowns, automatically we start flaring up and get ready to respond in a big way. So the first thing is we need to keep ourselves in check and figure out a way, at least in the moment, to try and stay calm. And if we can't, to revisit it at a later time. Right? It's much more helpful to say, it looks like there's a lot of big feelings. I think I need to take a break and then to come revisit it later, rather than to get into a head-on power struggle, fight, or whatever it may be. And then I think depending on the age of your child, it's really helping them understand what it is that they're feeling and why they're feeling that way. So young kids are going to need a lot of help and a lot of explanation, and sometimes just talking them out. Like, it's so hard to see your friends on Zoom and not be able to have a play date. That makes you feel sad, right? Like literally putting it out there and saying it. I think for our older kids, it's much more about asking questions that help them get there, but not saying it for them, right? Because if anyone knows teenagers, if you tell them, oh my gosh, you're so angry because you miss your friends, they're going to be like, Mom, that's not it at all. You're so stupid, right? And they need to be right. But I think there's ways that, you know, if the foundation is there for open communication and you show them that you really want to hear and you really do want to understand, they'll start talking and you can help them make sense and meaning of it.
Yeah. So you have any other advice for parents, how they can kind of manage this situation?
Yeah, I think it's really so a lot of the things that we've been hearing. I think trying to maintain some semblance of structure in children's lives, because structure is what helps children feel safe. And that doesn't mean you need to have a color-coordinated schedule, as we were joking about before, but maybe thinking about some anchors during the day that children have that are consistent, that they know, right? So if maybe it's family breakfast and family dinner every day, that kind of anchored in the day, that help children have a sense of, where am I in my day? You know, what's going to happen? And it cues them into, okay, school's going to start right after breakfast, or bedtime's going to be right after bed. I think their structure or life as they knew it was totally changed. And if we're able to create some type of new semblance of routine, that can be really helpful for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the younger ones, you need to kind of do more. I take a walk with my 3-year-old every morning. So that's kind of that's what happens in the morning thing, because otherwise she has no idea what time it is. Young preschoolers have no idea what time it is. So you need to give them things. So it could even be, well, again, this is maybe oversharing my parenting, but it's walk in the morning, and then there's like kind of free time, lunch, and then there's screen time in the afternoon, because that I need to get stuff done. So but that's the order of her day. So that anchors her, and she knows what's happening when. So figuring out those things. But I think another note on what you're saying is also choosing your battles is really important here. That balance between, you know, what to enforce and what not to. Because on one hand, there are the parents who are like, it's a pandemic, all rules go out the window. And kids do not do well under that kind of environment, because then there's no structure. They have no idea what's flying, what. Mom all of a sudden doesn't care about bedtime. She was very like rigid about bedtime. So you kind of can't give up on everything, but at the same time, you also can't enforce everything either. One thing I talk about in my practice a lot, I work with younger kids with behavior problems, is the negative coercive cycle that we get in with our kids. So, you know, you say, hey, pick up your shoes, and your kid says no. And you say, if you don't pick up your shoes, bad things are going to happen. And the kid just doubles down and now is screaming. And now you have to decide whether you're really going to enforce this rule that, yes, you wanted them to do, but is it worth the giant tantrum and the timeout or not? Because especially kids with behavior problems, they just escalate until you're also escalating with them, or you kind of defuse it. And the best way to get out of that negative coercive cycle is with a positive one. So kind of rolling with the resistance, something we talk about, kind of like picking your battles and saying, okay, this is not worth it to me, so I'll ask once. But if I ask once and my kid doesn't do it, knowing when I'm going to let it go and what I'm really not going to let go, and having a clear plan. One resource that I really like for younger kids that I've been telling people about that just came out is the cooperation chart. It's kind of a behavior chart throughout the day that you get rewarded. Like kids get smiley faces and frowny faces throughout the day, and there's a bowl of rewards that are things like play twister or obstacle course around the house or dance party for 2 minutes. And you know, one of the things that make the reward charts not work as well is because you need to buy kids presents all the time. But just having a quick way to say, hey kid, you do this, I approve, and you don't do this, I disapprove. So that's one resource. I can actually pull up their website and stick it in the chat if anyone's interested.
I'm so happy you brought up the negative coercive cycle. It's something I learned from you a few years ago and use in my parenting talks and classes all the time. And I think, you know, it's so, at this point in where we are, it's totally normal for us to be stuck in like the deep depths of that spiral of like having so much conflict and pressure, and being able to now, perhaps after this talk, take a step back and say, okay, what's really important to me right now in my parenting? What do I really want to follow through on with my children? And just picking 1 or 2 things right now. And those will be the struggles, or you know, the power struggles that you'll follow through on, and kind of letting other things that you typically wouldn't, letting it slide in this situation. I do want to leave time for questions. I just think one more thing in terms of thinking about resilience and how we can cultivate it into our children. Our children are constantly watching us for cues in terms of how to think about the world and respond to the world, right? And if you think about an 18-month-old that's first learning how to walk, and they walk a few feet away, and then they physically turn to you to make sure that they should keep going and it's okay and that you're still there. And then you smile and they get, okay, this is safe. I can do it. I can keep going, and they keep walking. Our children are doing that, some version of that, with us throughout our lives. I still turn back to my own parents sometimes and check in that I'm okay, right? So we really need to think about what cues am I sending my children and what messages am I sending them. They hear everything that we're saying and that we're talking about, even when we think that they're not. And ultimately, we do want to send them the message that, yes, right now there is this virus or things are very different, but the world is a safe place, right? And there will be a time when we can go back to school and we will be able to engage in our friends. And we're so excited for that time. A mother told me that her 6-year-old daughter was looking through a picture book the other day, and she was hugging her friend, and her daughter was like, oh, that was definitely before Corona, right? And then she looks up at her mom to see what her mom was going to say. And that's like a perfect teaching moment to be like, yes, that was. And I'm so excited for when we figure out everything and we're going to get back to that time, right? And if we're able to maintain that sense of we're going to get through this, we're going to be okay, we're going to be safe, our children are going to pick up on that as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would also just add that it also doesn't always have to be a positive message. You're allowed to also say, and I feel sad that we can't do that right now.
Yes.
And
I actually had a question in the chat box here, like talking through a hard situation. Is it helpful to talk through a hard situation in front of your kids? And I would definitely say yes, absolutely. Where it's okay. And again, this is where finding that balance that you were speaking about is really important, where it's okay to show our kids that we're having a hard time and that we're struggling. But we also want to show them that we're in control, right? So if we're feeling like we're going to totally lose control, we're having such a terrible day, we're going to break down, that's something that's really scary for our kids, and then sends the message that, like, my mom is not okay right now, I shouldn't be okay, right? But I think it is okay to say, you know what, I had so many meetings today and I was running to get everyone in on their Zoom school sessions and it just didn't work out for me. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Talking to them and letting them know that, and then perhaps some steps that you're going to take to help it get better, I think can be really helpful.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on that, and someone else asked about the balance between school and home. I've been doing a lot of school talks, and one thing I've been saying, which is funny because I've been saying it to the school talk, is we did not sign up for distance learning school. So schools are not set up for this. They're doing great. They're doing the best they can. But if it's not working for you and your kids, that's okay too. And that's something that you gotta have to, like, take your overachiever parentness and put it on the side and think about what's best for your kid. And if it's best for your kid to not go to math, that's okay. Like, that's a self-compassion moment. You're allowed to do what's best for your kids and not what the school says they should.
I think as a school representative, I think if you are having a hard time or you notice your child's having a hard time, like, I speak on behalf of all the schools, like, we want to help. We want to help your kids get through this. We know this is challenging for everyone. Just reach out to us. Let us know. If your kid needs to miss math, totally okay, but let's be in communication so that we can try and come up with a plan. I think what's really coming out with Zoom School is the kids who have trouble with organization and keeping track of assignments are really having a hard time. And there's ways that we can work with you in order to help and make that better. I think just letting someone on the school team know that your child's struggling or having a hard time could really go a long way in terms of figuring out what's most important and what to prioritize and what is okay to skip, and then what steps to take moving forward.
Yeah. I see another question in the chat about kids getting confusing messages, also adults getting confusing messages, but we'll leave that part for now, that some are allowed out, some are not. How do we talk about that? And my advice for talking about that is there are many, many things that we have different rules from other families about. So it could be like, you know, your bedtimes are different. It could be that you're, you know, overall, yeah, some families, I guess pre-corona, didn't wash their hands before they ate dinner, and some did. The higher tolerance for germs, higher tolerance for certain behaviors in general, different levels of religious observance. We have tools to talk about that. We can talk about this the same way as that. They do their thing, we do ours. And we don't judge them for that, but that doesn't mean we change our standards. This is our standards, that's theirs, and that's okay.
And just like lastly, I think if you feel like you're struggling or your child's struggling to a point where it's overwhelming or it's hard to get through the day, like, don't be afraid to reach out. There's so many people that are here to help and be supportive and to help you figure things out, whether it be personnel at your children's school or a private clinician or whoever it may be. Like, it's okay to be having a hard time right now. We're hoping that some of what we spoke about tonight can be helpful in terms of getting through those difficult moments. But if you're at a point where it just feels like too much, there's also outside support that you can get in order to help you get through it. And it's okay. Yeah.
And outside support for me always means therapy. Therapists are all doing virtual sessions, you know. I know it seems like not a great time to reach out for therapy if you need extra help, but it's the perfect time, except the truth is it's a little tricky to find time alone. That's something me and my colleagues have been talking about. I've been doing a lot of therapy sessions in people's cars, you know, waking up early, late nights, all those kind of things. But, you know, if you need extra help, you need extra help. So find a way to get it. There's another question about, actually how to explain to kids why other people can do things and you can't. So social distancing differences, and specifically, will it teach kids to be overly anxious? So I'm going to take this one because this is kind of my thing. I treat OCD, so I'm all about helping people do the opposite of what they feel. Like, you're a germaphobe, let's stick your hands in dirt and not wash them. And right now we're not doing any of that, which is super weird for me because I'm used to like doing all these gross things and I can't because it's not safe. But what we'd expect is that coronavirus ends and everybody goes back to normal. There's probably a small percentage of people who won't, but chances are they were probably on the anxious side anyway, and this is just the thing that tipped them over the edge. So I'm not worried about kids being overly anxious from this because, again, kids are resilient. But if anxiety runs in your family, which it does in kind of 1 in 3 people, then this is something to keep an eye on, and there are tools that we can give people.
Yeah, I think you're getting a lot of the questions. I'm not seeing so many. I do have someone that asks, it seems like mixed messages to help kids deal with uncertainty, but also help them feel safe. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful comment because I think even for ourselves, like on the one hand, we're like, okay, I need to deal with uncertainty, but I also need to convince myself I'm safe. But I think that can be a challenge. Ultimately, the safety that you can communicate with your child is in the relationship with you, right? That you're taking steps to take care of them, that the whole family is taking steps to take care of each other. There is uncertainty in terms of how long this is going to last or what's going to happen, but what I can assure you is my role as your parent is to keep you safe, and I'm doing everything in my power in order to do that. What do you think about that? I think that's one way to deal with that challenge.
Yeah, and that it is. Everything's uncertain, and it's okay to have certainty in that uncertainty. Like, you know, in the end of the day, it's a jump to believe that. Again, this goes back to my anxiety practice, but one example I gave to patients all the time was like, you don't know that I'm going to get home safely tonight. There's a 99.999% chance that I'm going to drive from my office to my home and be fine. But if I'm going to fixate on that 0.001% chance that I might not make it home, I'm going to dig my own grave in that, and I'm going to be so overwhelmed with that thought. So in the end of the day, life is full of uncertainty, and I find that actually comforting because, you know, everything's for a reason, and I'm just going to go with that. So we're doing what we can to be safe, and, you know, and the rest is up to God, and we are going to have to accept that. It's hard, but, we'll get there. And then I have another question for you, though, is how do we carve out time for ourselves when we literally feel like we don't have a moment alone, and then we feel guilt if we take some time and the kids are sitting in front of screens?
Question. I wish I had the $1 million answer to that. I think a lot of us are feeling guilt when we are taking time for ourselves, or if our kids are getting more screen time than usual. And a metaphor that I heard, or a visualization that I heard that was really helpful, is it's like when you're on an airplane and the oxygen masks come down, and they always tell you, you need to put on your oxygen mask before you put on the oxygen mask of the child that you're with, right? It's so important for us to be in an emotionally okay place so that then we can better work with, understand, and parent our children. So you can think of it as kind of refilling your own oxygen, right? Like, I need to take this time for myself. They'll be in front of screens, and as Regine said, they'll be okay. Most kids will bounce back from the excessive screen time right now, right? I'm going to take this time for myself because it's ultimately going to affect my family for the better later on. And if we could think about it in that way, I hope that it's less guilt-inducing.
And absolutely. I think the best way to take care of your kids is to take care of yourself. So that's something you can remind yourself of when you are locking your door and like keeping your kids out for a few minutes. That's allowed. You're allowed to like kind of do a gratuitous pick the packet up from the teacher and then sit in your car. Like, no one has to know that you took a few minutes to yourself. Like, park down the block for a few minutes and then deal with it. That's allowed. You can blame me then, I guess.
Going into the situation is helpful. Parents who have these like commiseration chats where they send pictures of themselves locked in their bathrooms, right? And kind of having that social interaction and knowing you're not alone in this can be helpful too.
Yeah.
Almost up time, or do we?
I think we're almost out of time. I don't see any more questions, but do you have anything you want, any final message that you want everyone to kind of be aware of and leave with?
Yeah, I think final message. There's a bunch, but I think it's really trust ourselves, right? We've been getting through it so far. We can continue to get through it, and try and focus on our relationships and what's most important to us right now, right? Let's not get bogged down by the little things or the tiny stressors. Let's really try to prioritize what's important and move forward with those.
Yeah, so that sounds great. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for having us and listening to us.
And on behalf of the center, I really want to thank Simone and Regine for taking the time to talk to us. It's amazing. We actually still have some more classes coming up tomorrow night. Laura Shamma will be discussing emotional eating, and we're going to really try to tackle all the areas that people are struggling with. And thank you. Regine, you wanted to say something? I think I cut you off.
No, that's it. Thank you.
It was very helpful. We really appreciate it. Thanks.